Your grandma calls you, your abuela, your lola, your grandmater. She calls you and says, hey, I found your grandpa's camera. Do you want it? So the answer is, of course, yes, I want it. I will give it a good home, grandmater. So you go over there and she gives you a dusty old box that looks like this. And you say to her, grandmater, thank you so much for this. I really appreciate it. But do you know if this stuff is working? She looks at you lovingly and says, I don't know. I'm trying to watch my mystery stories. Will you take this box and get out of here? You can take some hard candies on your way out if you want. And tell your mom to call me. I know she's not as busy as she says she is. She just doesn't want to call me. It's now on you to find out if this SLR is working. So real quick, let's talk about what this video is and is not. This video is not a troubleshooting guide. It's not a repair guide. It's just a quick start guide to help you answer the question, yes or no, is this SLR working? If you're running into issues, you might be able to solve them on your own. You might need to look up some other information at other resources, or you might have to get the thing repaired by a professional. Right now, this video is just a quick start guide to see if something is working or not. The first thing you need to determine is, what kind of camera is it? Is it fully mechanical? Does it shoot without a battery? Does it need a battery just for the light meter to operate? Or does it need a battery to be able to fire at all? So let's take a look at a couple of examples. This first example is a fully mechanical camera. It does not need batteries to operate. It fires at all shutter speeds, but it does need a battery to operate the light meter. The first thing that we want to look at is the lens. So figure out how to dismount the lens. On this camera, there's a little tab here that you push down, and it's a bayonet mount that allows you to unscrew the lens. And what you want to do with the lens is you want to put it at its smallest aperture. So if you're a beginner, that means the largest number. In this case, it's f/22. So you want to put it at its smallest aperture. You want to look through the lens, and most lenses will have this tab here. When you move that tab, you want to make sure that the aperture blades inside, it's like the iris, is opening and closing. So you can see there that it's opening and closing. You want to check to see, let's open that up. And you want to, now that it's open up, you can see all the glass. You want to make sure that there's no fungus inside the glass. If you've never seen fungus inside of a lens, it looks like this weird spider webby dusty stuff inside the lens. That you want to make sure that the lens is clean and clear. Special thanks to Brian Dubois for providing me these beautiful photographs of lens fungus. Brian, I'm sorry that your lens has fungus in it, but these really help me out a lot. Check out Brian's Twitter in the description below. The iris, or the aperture blades, same thing, opens and closes. So that's a good sign. This lens is good to go. Also, you want to turn the focus ring. As you turn the focus ring, you can see the front element come in and out. That's the lens focusing, so that's good. That's A-okay. So we're going to put that lens to the side. Now we're going to take a look at the camera. First thing you want to do is you want to wind the camera. Now, earlier I mentioned that, that this is a fully mechanical camera. It doesn't need batteries to fire, but it does need batteries for the light meter. I'm going to go ahead and wind that. And I want to look in here. Actually, this is the better method. You want to open up the camera, and you're going to look through there. You're going to put it on, let's do a slower shutter speed. Let's do maybe 1 second. Okay, so we're at 1 second. You're going to wind that, and then you're going to fire the camera. And I'm going to do that again. You saw that shutter open. So that is a good sign. So you're also going to take a look at the front of the camera, and you're going to see a mirror in there. See that mirror that's kind of at a 45-degree angle? You're going to fire it. You want to make sure that mirror flips up. First of all, you want to make sure that mirror is even there to begin with. So obviously it's there. When you look through the viewfinder, you're actually looking through a prism and at a reflection coming off of that mirror through the lens. But that's a different topic. So that's a good sign. That mirror is flipping up. And when you open the back, you see through that shutter. You see the shutter opening. So that's all a good sign. Another thing you want to check for is inside. You want to make sure there's no debris inside. These cameras have foam light seals. and those degrade over time. It's just a natural thing. The material it's made out of, it's a foam adhesive material. The stuff just crumbles over time naturally. So you want to make sure that no gunk is kind of floating freely inside there. You might need to get those light seals replaced, either by yourself or by a professional. Again, that's not what we're talking about. We're just talking about general function. The last thing that we want to check on this camera is if the light meter is working. Now, this camera does require a battery for the light meter, so I'm going to go ahead and open up that compartment. So I've got the battery compartment open here, and a quick Google search tells me that this camera needs 2 of these batteries. It can take either 2 LR44 alkaline batteries or 2 SR44 silver oxide batteries. And again, I just determined that from Google. I prefer silver oxide over alkaline. I won't get into why here, but if you have an option of using silver oxide versus an alkaline battery, that's always the better option. So I'm going to go ahead and insert the batteries into this thing and screw that in. And so again, it's firing. It doesn't need the batteries to fire. And what I'm going to do is look through the viewfinder. What you're looking for inside the viewfinder is either an LED light that goes up and down as you change your exposure settings. And some cameras have a needle that goes up and down. It's either on the side of the viewfinder or along the bottom of the viewfinder. But basically, as you're changing your exposure settings and you're pointing it at a subject, you want to see that exposure meter going up and down as your exposure changes. That'll tell you that the light meter is working. Now, based on what I've seen today with this camera, I would be comfortable putting a roll of film through this. So let's take a look at another example. This is an Olympus OM10. This camera needs a battery to operate, and this is the biggest giveaway right here. You can see the auto setting on the shutter speed dial. That means it's got an auto exposure capability, and long story short, that requires electricity, that requires electronics in the camera to fire the camera at the proper shutter speed. And obviously it needs a battery to be able to do that. So I already looked at the lens in this camera like I did in the previous example. The lens is a really fine example, so I'm happy with that. So I'm gonna go on to testing the camera to see if it works. Same kind of deal down here. You've got the battery compartment, so I'm gonna go ahead and open that up. And in a stroke of luck, it uses the same kind of batteries that our previous example used, is these 2 LR44s or SR44 batteries. So I'm going to go ahead and load up these batteries. Now, when I loaded up the batteries there, you might have heard that shutter fire. Go ahead and tighten that up. So now that the batteries are loaded up, I'm going to go ahead and remove this lens because we want to be able to see inside that compartment. So I'm going to go ahead and cock that shutter, and looking straight into that compartment there, we're looking at the mirror. And it does flip up. So let's do that again. So that's a good sign. And again, we want to open up the back. Not only do we want to make sure that the mirror is flipping up, we want to look through that shutter, make sure that shutter curtain is actually opening. So, yep, that's hard to see. Now, again, it's firing using an auto exposure, so I can't actually slow this down. It's got a bulb mode, so why don't we test that? There it is. Shutter's opening. So that's good news. Again, you want to take a look at, while you're in here, you want to make sure that there's no gunk, make sure there's no kind of deteriorating seals. In this case, it's kind of hard to see, but you can see that kind of crustiness there. So that's something that you've got to watch out for. So that might cause some light leaks. Unfortunately, you're not going to know if there are any light leaks until you get a roll of film back. That's really the only way to be able to test it. But based on what I've seen here today, I'm comfortable running a roll of film through this camera. I would say this camera is most likely working, but until you run a roll of film through it, you're not going to know if the meter, if the auto exposure is accurate, if the light seals are good. In all likelihood, they are. You know, run a roll of test film through it, a roll that's not super critical or super important, and get it tested out. Okay, and one final example that we're going to look at today is a classic Minolta SRT 101. Sometimes things go wrong with cameras, And so we're gonna test this thing out just to see. And then we're gonna look inside. Now you probably noticed that mirror did not flip up. So that's a bad sign. Let's do it again, just for good measure. Sometimes old cameras, they get stuck and you need to fire it a couple of times and they kind of miraculously start working. But that's not the case with this camera. So that is obviously, that mirror is not flipping up. Let's look at it through the back. We kind of already know what's going to happen here. So, we see that shutter is opening, but the mirror is not flipping up. So this camera does have a problem because of the way, obviously because of exposure works, and I don't want to take that for granted. Maybe you don't know this, but light has to come through the lens and hit the film. And if something is blocking that light, if something is blocking the view of the film, you're going to have problems. So what's going to end up happening here is when you get a roll of film back from this camera, that roll will be blank. So poor thing, I'm probably going to send it off to get repaired somewhere. But that's just an example of a common problem that you might see. Now, with all that said, the only guarantee of a fully functioning camera and a properly exposed roll of film is if you shoot a roll of film through the camera and get that roll developed and get back good negatives. That's only the real guarantee you have that a camera is fully working. A camera is made up of a number of systems. For example, if the film doesn't take up properly or if the spacing of the negatives is incorrect, you're not going to know that until after you get a roll of film back. But with this quick start guide, it's just a way to get you comfortable in knowing that a camera probably works and that you should go further in testing it and putting a roll of film through it. Okay, so those were my quick tips. Hopefully that gets you confident and comfortable enough with a camera to go on to the next step of actually putting a roll of film through it and shooting with it. And if you have any questions, please feel free to put them in the comments below or tweet me or send me a message on Instagram, wherever. I'll do my best to answer them. Also, if you see a question in the comments and you know the answer to it, feel free to chime in. So let's help each other out. Let's get each other shooting with these awesome machines that our grandparents give us or that we find at thrift stores or garage sales or whatever. And let's preserve these machines that can produce some amazing memories for us. So thank you so much for watching. If you feel like supporting me, there's a couple of ways that you can do that. There's going to be links in the description below. And I really appreciate you watching. I'll see you guys next time.